We are calling this one a fireside chat, but you know we've had more than enough fire for 1 week, so let's just keep the flame in our imagination, shall we? Radia Perlman is to computer network architecture what Frank Gehry is to public buildings, because with her spanning tree, she pruned the Ethernet from a twig into a lush forest. And Tom Leighton, as co-founder and chief scientist at Akamai Technologies, shapes the virtual weather with cloud delivery that's used by some of the world's biggest companies. He is in several halls of fame and science academies, and right here today. Welcome them both. Just drag me away if this is talking.
So, what exactly is privacy? Is it good? Is it bad? How do we make it happen? So, yeah, is privacy just a good thing? That obviously everything should be private?
Yeah, I think privacy generally is a pretty good thing. That said, you do need to use user data for certain functions. For example, to provide security. And to provide security, you need to be looking at what users are doing. In fact, we keep track of how all of you hold your cell phones when you're logging into something, how you move the mouse, your neuromuscular activity. Now, that's about as private as it gets, but because we can see that and use it, we can keep somebody from stealing your bank account. Because when you go into the bank account, you do it a certain way when you log in. That bot run by organized crime, they do it differently. And that's a way that we use private information to stop criminal organizations from stealing all your money.
Right. As a user, I'm always kind of really surprised at how what I thought was private information flows. So I go search for something, and then I get emails for ads about that. And, at a high level, what are the mechanisms by which things that I wouldn't think are tied together somehow get found out so they can target ads for me or, right, how do they do this?
Well, yeah, pretty much everything you do is being tracked by a lot of entities. And of course, you see the little G or the F or the bluebird, and that's something that is used to track wherever you go online. And generally, that's not for something too malicious, but there's also entities, nation states, other organizations that have, the ability to track everything you're doing online for bad purposes, for profiling, ultimately for even doing things around elections. And there you don't see that on the page because it's invisible to you, but there's content that they've managed to purchase or get access to a site, create cookies so that they can track what users are doing.
Right, so I was kind of shocked when I realized that my browser vendor has access to my browser history.
Well, of course they do, yeah.
And sells it, and also my email vendor reads my emails. And it's sort of cute that I get an email and it suggests replies I could do. It's like, hey, that email was for me. Why are you reading this? And end-to-end encryption won't help this. Yeah, I mean, what is your feelings about that sort of thing?
Well, those services aren't free. You don't pay for it directly, but of course the data is being monetized. I just was talking to somebody literally yesterday, and they had gotten a ride from a car service in I think it was a Taurus, and literally during the ride they got an ad for a Taurus. Well, how did that happen? Well, of course, because of the ride service, that they knew what car they were in, and they knew the device because it had ordered, the car, and they were able to connect that. And of course, that ad has a lot more value now. And so the ads have a lot of value when you can target specific content to an individual. So yeah, they know everything and they're monetizing it.
Right. So does that mean that people don't actually care about privacy because they care much more about getting things for free? And so rather than paying for email that only lets you read your own email, is that the trade-off that people actually want to make, that they want to have more interesting ads?
I think we all like things that are free, that don't cost us money, and I'm not sure how much people really think about what's happening underneath the covers and and how that information is being used. And they might not like it if they really thought about it or really knew.
Right. And I have to admit that although privacy sounds good, I always root for law enforcement when they catch some murderer because they sort of know which toll booths you've gone through, and there's cameras everywhere. Yeah. Now, I'm veering into security a little bit, which is like very overtwined with privacy. So security is kind of a big word, and it can mean a lot of different things. So one thing is, geesh, I shouldn't have my machine get infected because I click on a link or I open an attachment. So why is it dangerous for me to open a Word document?
Well, because you might execute something that is malware. And it's very hard today, not just for ordinary people, but even security experts today will click on the wrong link and get malware. And now we're to the point, the most recent attacks that are happening, which have victimized some pretty well-known websites, where you just go to the normal website, not even the phishing link, but the regular website. And that website today has a lot of third-party content, not just advertising, but marketing, third-party content, performance management content. A typical website today, 90% of the content comes from third parties. It's not run by the website. And those third parties get infected with malware. And so now what happens is you go to a famous airline site to buy a ticket. On the site, there's malware, or there's a link to a malware site. Your browser ingests that, and because of that malware, your browser sends off your credit card to the criminal organization. And this is happening at a massive scale, and you get a massive data breach that way. And you didn't do anything wrong. Not that it's wrong to click on a fishy link, but you went to the real website and got there, and you still gave up all your private information because they were linking to malware.
Right, and actually, even if I just decide the internet is insecure and I never use the network for anything, but I buy something in person at a store with a credit card, they can get broken into.
Well, if you use your credit card, that would be non-internet ways, but yeah, so there's a lot of bad activity out there.
Right, but you know, as a human, I sort of think it should be safe to plug my iPhone into a USB port to charge it, and that shouldn't be dangerous. And opening up a Word document, maybe it could say objectionable things to me or draw really ugly pictures, but it shouldn't infect my machine.
You know, it shouldn't, and I think the challenge is, from the very beginning days of the internet, security was not incorporated in a heavy way into it. And to this day, the core protocols are not really secured. And so you have to build the security on top of it. And that's what, companies do, is they'll build security on top of the internet to try to make it be safer. And that's, of course, what, we do at Akamai, is we sell services to keep these bad things from happening to people.
Right, so an example, like even though I certainly understand, all of the crypto and the protocols and the DNS names and the IP addresses, I was kind of really, it really shed a light on things when I was taken in by a scam. So I searched for Renew Washington State driver's license and got a bunch of hits and clicked on the first one. And had I bothered looking at the DNS name in the URL, it looked perfectly reasonable. It was washingtonlicensing.org. Why should I, as a human, know that that's not the right site? And so I clicked on it, and it was a very well-designed site. It asked me all the things I expected, my address, my license number, and my credit card number. And then it said, here's a bunch of offers you're qualified for, which made me realize, hey, maybe it wasn't the right site. And so, indeed, it started charging a whole bunch of things. Luckily, my bank, the fraud department, said, hey, which of these are legitimate? And I said, these ones are bad. And they said, okay, we'll disallow them, and gave me a new credit card. But what could be, with all of this marvelous theory, we're actually dealing with humans. Humans don't actually know the DNS name. Is there anything that can save us from this kind of shenanigans?
Yeah, that's a classic phishing attack, where you clicked on a link that you thought was taking you over to this safe place here, looked like that, but really took you over to this bad place. And then when you got to the bad place, they made you feel comfortable like you're at the safe place and to give them all of your information. And for that kind of thing, there are things now that can be done to stop that using the DNS system. So DNS is what converts the name into an address on the internet. It's sort of like 411, you convert a name to a phone number. It's the internet version of that. And DNS doesn't have security built in, which is why you were able to click on that and go to this bad place. But increasingly now, there's services that when you're looking up the location, they already know, in many cases, we already know, that's a bad place, and you don't want to go there. And so, when we look up the IP address, we'll say, no, Radia, we don't think that's where you want to go, and we'll give you a warning, and then you don't go there and lose all your information. And now you see some of the major carriers providing these services. Comcast just announced Security Edge, that's exactly what this does. And businesses can buy these capabilities now, but it's just a matter of integrating security into the basic infrastructure, which is in the process of happening.
Right. Well, it was supposed to be built in terms of, all these certificates and SSL and whatever. But
SSL, OpenSSL that everybody uses, you remember Heartbleed? Right? So the security protocol that we all use to encrypt our communications when we're sending our credit cards around and so forth, that had a huge bug introduced into it, and for years, any criminal organization or government worth their salt could read everything you're doing. So there's bugs even in the encryption software, which is a challenge.
So, so at DNS is a way to protect people. If DNS sort of knows certain names that, these are, but there has to be like a way for users to report, hey, this was a bad name. And as I couldn't figure out a way to do that, even though I figured out a bad name.
Well, you went to your bank and you told them what happened, so they do have reporting mechanisms. And,
so they report back to DNS or whatever?
Well, there's databases with bad stuff, and every day there's millions of new domain names being created on the internet, every day. And 80% of them are for malicious sites. And so it really takes a lot of effort to be keeping track of all that, and then you want to very quickly identify the characteristics of the bad sites so that you can help people through a service like your carrier could provide not get duped like this. You click on it, but then you get a warning message because that's been identified as one of these new domains that looks bad.
Right. So let me look at a question. Is it more achievable to make the internet secure or to make our computers more secure and resilient to insecure networks?
Yeah, your computers being secure is not going to solve the problem because you can go to a bad place and have a perfectly legitimate SSL session and conduct a transaction, which more or less means you're giving up all your information to that third party. So just having a safe computer isn't good enough. You need the protocols and the infrastructure and the entire, even at the application layer, to be secured. And this is a major ongoing effort. And the bad guys are ahead. They're nation states. It's organized crime. They're very well motivated, very well funded, smart people. And so we're up against some challenging adversaries, and we need technology to, get out ahead of it, because we're not ahead today.
Right. So it's not like we've carefully designed all these things.
Not at all.
For instance, so there was denial of service that in the early days, people wrote papers saying, there's all these security issues in terms of divulging information or unauthorized use of services. But denial of service, we don't have to worry about that. There's no way to make money from it, which of course...
Well, okay, so organized crime, but they use that as extortion. Right? So they'll say, pay us this many Bitcoins or we're going to DOS your site. We see that all the time. And the bad part, it's like, buying fire insurance, in the old days, with organized crime. And at least then, if you bought the fire insurance from the local, bad guy, you were protected. On the internet, any bad guy can reach you and try to DOS you. And so you have to, you'd be paying off multiple ones. So you do make money from denial of service today.
Oh, absolutely.
And of course, other people do it for other reasons, to take down entities. You had 2012, all the headlines from groups out of the Middle East taking down North American banking. So you could not bank online. And so, companies responded. For example, as an example where Akamai responded by building out massive capacity to absorb and deflect the denial of service attacks so we can keep banks operational today.
Right, so when DOS first started, you just had to have more bandwidth than the attacker. And then distributed denial of service, like, wow, that is so incredibly creative. I never would have thought of that. So on the one hand, it's great. It's sort of full employment, lots of things for students to do. But, we're not going to think of all of these things. The bad guys are going to give us more problems to solve, and we'll try our best to stay ahead of them.
Well, you have that. The bad guys are giving us more problems to solve. But also, you do want to think about the vulnerabilities. And one of the challenges with the internet is that it makes DOS attacks really easy. So you can, with a small amount of resources, generate a large volume of effort on your target. And now with IoT, it's getting a lot worse because you have billions of devices out there that are smart now. They got a fully capable CPU, full communication stack. They're connected to a high bandwidth link in your home. You probably all have 50 or 100 megs into your home. Some of you have a gigabit per second. And you got devices there now with no security that have access to this incredible resource, and it's easy to take them over. And then they can be used as bot armies, and are all the time, to launch attacks. And not just denial of service attacks, but application layer attacks, to take over your bank account. If you're like most people, I won't admit that I'm like most people here too, but I am. You use the same password on a lot of sites because you have accounts on dozens of sites and you have the same login credentials. One of those sites gets hacked. The bad guys now have a credential for you. The first thing they do is they take a massive bot army and they try to log in at every bank in the world, every commerce site in the world, now every media company, to see, does that credential work there? Did you have an account with that login? And then when they get a hit, which means they logged in successfully, immediately they sell it to organized crime, who monetizes it, empties your bank balance. Now you even see it in gaming, where all the tools you won or the toys or whatever, those have monetary value. They'll empty it and monetize it. And this is all happening using devices in people's homes. It's an incredible platform that the attackers have access to now.
Yeah, I do not understand why people want everything attached to the internet. I have no idea why people find it attractive to have an Alexa in their house. And, it's not just denial of service and things like that. They can burn your house down by turning on your coffee maker. Right, I do not think my refrigerator needs to be talking to the internet, or my child's toy doll or something. It's terrifying.
But people want to control it and have access to it. I can't tell you how many companies we've worked with where it's their HVAC system that got taken over by a bad guy, roamed around the enterprise, collected all the emails and sensitive data, and then exfiltrated it to a botnet. And it was the HVAC system. And nobody's even thinking about it, never mind that it's connected to the enterprise network. But of course it is, because somebody in the enterprise wanted to control temperatures from their console online. And of course, the HVAC system didn't come with security, and so it's a great place for the attackers to take over.
Yes, I run into a lot of engineers that say, well, I'm not a security person. I'll just sort of build my thing, and then later on the security people can sprinkle pixie dust on it and make it secure.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, so, I say we don't need more security products. We need secure products.
Yeah, you need to build in security from the ground up, and that's not what we see happening today. And it costs money.
Right.
And that's another disincentive for building it in.
So another aspect of security is how it turns out to be easy to totally destroy society. Who would have thought that? So there's the inadvertent destroying of society, which is having machine learning want to keep you engaged as long as possible. So it figures out what you like to see, doesn't give you anything else, gives you more and more extreme stuff, and it causes society to get very fragmented. But yeah, just in terms of spreading false information immediately. So, virally. And who is to know what truth is? So if it was Channel 4 News or something, you could do cryptography and authentication to know where the stuff came from. But these days, you can't have Channel 4 News be everywhere where news is happening. So everyone becomes a reporter with their cell phone. And so the source of the stuff is anonymous. There's no way for you to have vetted these people. And you could also make forensically indistinguishable false videos and stuff. So is there any hope? Legislation, more educated users? Do you have any advice about that?
Well, okay. There's
hunger.
pluses and minuses with social networking, for sure. I wouldn't go as far as saying security is destroying the internet. I don't think that's the same as security. I think by and large security is helpful, to people. There is going to be a lot of legislation. It's happening now. And it's designed to try to protect end user privacy. In Europe you have GDPR. You're starting to see very large fines there for not even malicious behavior, but just a company got hacked and huge fines. California, you have CCPA coming January 1st, New York State. Other states are going to pass legislation. The federal government here is trying to figure out, okay, should they be doing something versus letting all the states pass laws? And there's a lot of countries around the world with laws, some of which we wouldn't like. We don't think their laws are the right thing, maybe because it's protecting the government at the expense of, the individual or the citizen. I think trying to legislate technology problems is always challenging. It takes a long time to get laws passed. There's generally unintended consequences that you didn't think about. Legislators often are not super technical and don't have always a full appreciation for what's happening. So it's a complicated thing, but it is happening now. Laws are going to be passed. And we just hope to try to help the legislators do the best that they can with it.
Right, to have a disconnect between the people making the laws and the people building the technology, where the laws can say that you have to do things that are totally impossible. And that's very hard as an engineer to deal with. So ransomware, everyone pays in Bitcoin. Suppose nobody invented cryptocurrency. Would that mean that we couldn't have had ransomware?
Oh, no, there's other ways to pay. And before Bitcoin, there were other ways to pay. So that Bitcoin didn't create the problem.
Yeah, I always wondered how you buy something from a remote person in some country you never heard of. You're buying stolen credit cards numbers. How do you pay them?
They have figured that out. Yeah, there's a lot of money flows in the black market for sure. In fact, one of the reasons the governments really like digital currency is not from the Bitcoin perspective, but it would be major banks and governments would run it and control it, is so they can have a view into what's happening in the black market. Because if you don't have normal cash, it'll be easier to track organized crime, or at least to tax it. And so that's why a lot of the world's major governments want to go all digital for currency.
Right. So we have a question about authentication. You touched on it a little bit. Passwords are horrible. And then, people cleverly tell you, you have to change your password every 90 days. You have to have a different password at every site. There's no way that humans can cope with this.
Right.
So, there is like biometrics, like you were talking about, which I personally am very skeptical of because, my wrist gets broken. And now, whoever's trying to do that thinks I'm not me.
Yeah, no, there's challenges, for sure there. There's device fingerprinting. there's location. And here's the tension between privacy and security. Because keeping track of all these things for the purpose of, you need this to really do security. And in fact, we track a lot of this stuff so that someone doesn't take over your bank account or your commerce account. But it does, in some way you could think of it as, well, that's private information. And so the more you see movements to say you can't look at any private information like that, well, that's what we use to keep the bad guys from stealing from you. And so there's a tension there.
Right. So, someone that was telling me about the challenges of running a public cloud. So when it first went online, it was like, wow, look how many customers we have. And it was all, people buying time with stolen credit card numbers. But the way the company running the cloud was very careful not to ever see the credit card numbers. So they would just pass it off to a bank to process it. So there was no way for them to do things like remember, oh, this credit card has been, using stuff for thousands of times recently. Maybe it's suspicious.
Yeah, well, a lot of the attacks today come from the big cloud providers because it's easy to buy CPU and to get bandwidth. The malware in these famous attacks generally is all being downloaded from the most famous cloud companies and the most famous, software repositories and open source libraries. And, and that helped people trust that because it came from there, but really it's not one of those companies made it, it's some third party put it there and made it available, and so you trust it when you get it from them. That's where most of it, like everybody else uses them, so do the bad guys.
Right. So these EULAs that users click on, nobody actually reads them. And if you do read them, it actually kind of says, these are my rules today. I feel free to change it tomorrow without letting you know. So that's awfully terrifying as well.
Yeah. No, you sign away a lot. And you have to be able to function.
Right, so sometimes things allow you to set things. So like if you have an application that says, do you want to allow this application to see your, where you are or whatever? And you could actually answer these, but the application hasn't been tested except for the wide open answer yes to everything. Or if you say no, it just won't work. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and Europe may well pass a law saying that even if you check the EULA, the company still can't use your information, that you can't give up your privacy, because I think they understand that everybody just checks it and you sort of have to because you want to use the services, and it's still not right. So we may see laws passed that restrict companies even if you click the EULA.
Right, so if you make a toy that some kid manages to sort of leave it out in the sun forever, which melts the eye enough that he can get it off and swallow it and he chokes, you sue the company for millions of dollars. Whereas software, the EULAs basically say, look, it wasn't our idea to sell this to you. You insisted, and we make no guarantees whatsoever about this stuff. Why is it that they get away with that?
Well, there's specific laws that protect software companies from defects in the software. So that's, in the law, but you are seeing now some very large fines here and in Europe and other countries on big companies for what they consider to be bad behavior. And I think that is going to increase, and you're going to see tougher and tougher laws.
Right, okay. So let's see, we're almost out of time. How useful is IP-level blackholing as a community effort to combat bad actors? I'm not sure I understand that one.
Well, that means there's an IP address that's bad, and so you black hole it so no traffic can go there. And that it can be useful. Now, the problem is who decides it's bad, and do they really know what they're doing, and do you accidentally black hole somebody who's good? And we've seen that happen. So really you want to have, professional services around it that have blacklists and whitelists, and that you understand what you're doing there, and that you're checking to make sure that something that's blacklisted really has done bad things.
Right, and then there's the problem like in a public cloud where someone does bad stuff for like 15 minutes and gets the IP address blackballed, and then a good guy comes in and gets the address.
Yeah, so you got to be really careful. I think
Whoops.
the mic died, but you got to be really careful with that because there's a lot of shared IP space, dynamic IPs. So the IP address you have now, somebody might have that in a half an hour or a day. And so it can't just be based on IP, which is another problem with IP black holing. You want to really know what is the entity, the device, the user before you start blacklisting it so you really caught something bad.
Right. Okay, so we really are out of time. I'm surprised nobody has a hook dragging us off
I think
the stage.
he's coming with one.
Oh, okay.
Radia, before you leave, this question has come up a lot through all the sessions, and I'm going to ask you to respond to one of the questions that was forwarded through there about you're one of the only women who are involved in the technology side of the development of the internet. Can you just reflect on your experience in that context? There's a lot of people in the audience who would really like to get your opinion.
Well, I'm certainly happy to chat with people. I don't really tend to think about it a lot, but it's definitely the case that there's very few women, and I would think things change, but it doesn't. And the more senior you get, the fewer women there are. So, you know, I have fun with it. Like, I was at a big meeting where we just bought another company. There were 50 of us in the room, and I was, as usual, the only woman. And the person next to me, who was from the new company, had never been in the building. When it came to the first break, he said, can you show me where the bathroom is? And I said, sure, but I have my own private bathroom. And he said, really? And I said, yeah, I don't know why they insist on that. I think it's because I'm a fellow. And he was so impressed that all the fellows got private bathrooms. And I walked him to the men's room, walked right across the hall to the women's. He saw me go in and he laughed. But yeah, I'm not, what I think diversity is important for is not that we need people with different body shapes and skin colors, but we need people that see the world in different ways. So, yeah.
Well, let's thank both our panelists for the conversation.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks very much.
Yeah.
Thanks. I'll take that from you. Okay. We are going to go to another poll, and as we do that, I want to thank everybody who's been contributing so far. There's been a very high level of participation, and that's super valuable for the objectives of the conference. So if we're in a position to bring up our next poll question, basically we want to know, how do you feel about your own privacy? You don't worry about it? You don't care about it? You're willing to make some trade-offs in order to gain free stuff? Or you really want this problem nailed down and you want to protect your data at all costs? So we'll let that stand up there for a few seconds more. I guess we're mostly in the middle camp there, willing to make some trade-offs. All right. Let me see. We are due for another video. Okay. I think maybe we need a few seconds to bring that up. One thing I wanted to mention too. So all of the questions, there's probably 10 times more questions being submitted than we can get to. So I spoke to the organizers, and they're going to make sure that those are made available, all the raw questions after the event. I can't tell you at this point because I'm not sure what the method of distribution will be, but they've agreed to make everything available after the program. All right, let's go to the video. Thanks.